Horizon TV, the beacon for the nation.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very good evening right here from Kenya's capital. I'm talking about Nairobi Metropolitan. This is Live Real Talk coming to you straight from Jamia Mosque, Nairobi. My name is Faisal Kassim and welcome. Join us this evening as we are talking about resumption of schools in what can be regarded as a push and pull between the education stakeholders. The government is insisting that we need to go back to school, and them, as a government, they will take extra measures to ensure that students get the knowledge, of course, in the best of conditions ever. But the teachers and the leading teachers association, talk about NAT, talk about KUPET, among many others, came out strongly, say that the government is not yet ready to resume classes. Joining me this evening to have this discussion, I have none other than Professor Muhammad Karama, who is the chairperson of the National Muslims COVID-19 Response Committee. Assalamu alaikum, Professor.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much for making time for us this evening. And of course, the best among us in the panel this evening, I have Ms. Fatma Ali Suman, who is an educationist and of course runs an institution within the capital. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much for making time for us this evening. Now, Professor, I'm going to start with you. This whole debate of whether we are ready to go back to school or not, as a medic, as the chairperson of the Kenya National Muslims Response Committee on COVID, of course being the chairman of the Muslim outfit, do you think we are ready to go back to schools and resume studies as the government is trying to insist?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think that's a very difficult question, given the circumstances that we are in now, that 152,000 girls got pregnant during this period by staying at home. The other issue is looking at government preparedness to observe some of the guidelines that are provided for keeping distance, physical distance, increasing the infrastructure, increasing the number of classrooms, and so on. It's a challenge. We had the CS, Minister of Education, encouraging teachers to start teaching students under trees. It's a very difficult balancing game to say that it is the case of choosing the lesser evil. But in real sense, in Kenya, we are not very ready to what was expected of the government to do. Possibly they have not been able to do in time to be able to observe all the requirements and the guidelines that are provided by the Ministry of Health.
Okay.
But all in all, I think it is still safer for the students to be back to school, also to prevent some of the social and misfortunate occurrences that have been reported in the media and so on.
Professor, if I understand you correctly, you say the government and the country is not ready to go back to school, but because of some societal evils, one of them being the teenage pregnancy, you think it's better to go back to school and risk the life of the students?
It is better to go not only for that reason, but also for the students to be able to catch up with the loss of time. Mm-hmm. And to be able to complete the expected areas of coverage in terms of education. So there are benefits in this, but the basic minimum requirements for them to be, for the student and the teachers and the workers to be safe, that should have been met.
Wow. Thank you. Ms. Fatma, at a time where Kenya is having at least 96,614 current numbers starting on COVID stats, I'm going to ask you the same question. Do you think we are ready to go back to school? Prof has categorically said that we are not well equipped to go back to school from the medic's perspective, but the government is adamant on its position that we need to go back to school. Do you think that's the best decision?
Well, I think we are between a hard place and a rock, and the choices are hard. But again, you would want to ask yourself, when do we think we will ever be ready? Because again, the demand for social distancing, the infrastructure requirement in schools, and requirement of also staffing are things that cannot be achieved overnight. And again, as an educator, I'll tell you, it's also to a great disadvantage to our children staying at home without learning. So one big worry I would have is that we are actually stopping the progression of generations by students staying away from school and virtually staying away from learning and being exposed to different social norms, I can say. We are not so sure whether these are helpful situations that they are exposed to. There could be parents who are building their children's skills socially. They're helping them learn outside school. They're even homeschooling them. And there could be majority of who are not having anything progressive happening at home. And basically, children turn to maybe drugs, to other social ills, and that exposure in itself can be very dangerous. So we just have to make the hard choices because, again, the reality is, when will we ever be ready?
Okay, interesting. Thanks so much for that comprehensive answer. Professor, in the partial reopening of these institutions, of course, when the government announced that the grade 4, or rather class 4, class 8, and the form 4s should resume schools, we saw a number of students and teachers as well contracting the virus, and even some teachers succumbed to it. Now, if we are going back to school and you're resuming education fully as a country, as the medical fraternity, are we in a position to handle a surge again in case we have rising numbers?
I want, first of all, to also agree with my sister Fatima, that the choice to go back to school is a decision that the government has made. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, there are benefits to this. However, the preparedness to address the upsurge of cases is something that we need to be very cautious about. There are specific requirements that we look forward that educational institutions will put in place to address the likelihood of such occurrences. We are aware that children of and adolescents, they are less likely to get infected, and if they get infected, it's much more milder infections. But we don't want to go into those areas. You know, people under 18 years are only contributing 8.5% of the pandemic estimated, and therefore it is likely that there will be less transmission in that age, but we have to look at the teachers and the other workers where the precautions have to be taken in some way, and maybe we might be able to discuss what precautions should be taken to ensure that we do not get these incidences occurring in schools.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. Ms. Fatima, I'm going to bring you in now as an educationist. Besides the students contracting the virus, and of course, one of the requirements that the government has set is that all institutions should be linked up to a medical facility and they should have an internal COVID team that must have gone through some training. But is that sufficient? We don't know. Let's see when it happens. Now, as an educationist, besides students and learners contracting the virus, what do you think or do you foresee as the other possible challenge that might be experienced when schools resume?
One of the biggest challenge that we foresee as educators is the anxiety level, is the fact that children have been away from school for a very long time, and that they, in the process, have developed a big learning gap, and that they equivalently have been exposed to a lot of stories about COVID-19, but maybe also in very informal ways, ways that were not handled by educators, and there could be a lot of misinformation they were exposed to. However, also we are aware that most of us were talking to each other, but were not talking to the children. So many of the children would come with their own anxiety, they will come with their own excitements, that we are not so sure. We will take a bit of time to help them settle, help them normalize, and give them a lot of psychosocial support before we actually start teaching them. That's the reality on the ground. At the same time, parents also, there are those who might not feel it's safe to have their children back in school. There are those who could feel they are ready for schooling, but again also they might put a lot of pressure on the teachers, who themselves will also require a lot of social support, psychosocial support. Because again, remember, teachers are human beings. They are just like, some of them are parents, some of them could have been out of job for a very long time. Some in the private sector could have lost their jobs and now regaining and restarting life. And that in itself is a challenge. So you can imagine the pressure of handling children who require support from that same educator, and the pressure that most probably we expect from parents who are going to be rather paranoid and are not so sure, because this, we cannot say anyone is an expert in this. We are all trying out something. So it's just a matter of, you know, people understanding that that support is required from every angle. Quite a number of teachers have had their own research, maybe have been training, maybe they got access to training. Others could be doing their own study and trying to understand the pandemic and how to deal with it. But I would say there were no actual programs that were set up to formally recruit teachers and prepare them for what to expect. But I'm telling you, that's going to be a bit of a challenge. Wow. But again, teachers are very good in improvising ways and, you know, coming up with things that would work, most probably.
Inshallah, and we are praying for you that it all goes well. Now, Professor, there are a number of institutions, a number of countries actually that have gone ahead and opened up their institutions. We talk of Rwanda, talk of UK, actually, which closed again, South Africa, United States of America, among many others. They reopened and then they closed down. So from this, basically, there are some lessons that were picked here and there. Now, as an entity that's supposed to be guiding the Muslim community on matters COVID-19 and leading the community on matters COVID-19, of course, under the National COVID-19 Response Committee, what support have you thought of or have you given to the schools or the educationists or the educators, basically, for as far as COVID is concerned in the wake of a reopening of the schools soon?
Thank you very much. I think I want also to follow up with what Sister Fatma said, that COVID management in Kenya has created fear and all over the world, to both parents, to teachers, to students. There's a lot of fear and anxiety. So one of the things that we as a committee have done was to look for Muslim institutions and also some non-Muslim institutions and trained the teachers on the first aid, what we refer to as psychological first aid, on how to handle the students in case of anxiety and that fear. So this is a very important component, because the students will not be able to learn under that fear that they may get infected, they will fear their colleagues. So the first and foremost important thing is to ensure we overcome this fear, and we also provide this support to the teachers, and we have trained the teachers. However, this does not stop at just the school and the children, but it needs to go to the parents. The parents must be prepared also to understand as it has been said, they could be putting a lot of pressure on schools. And I think that is necessary to ensure that where they send their children, basic minimum requirements are put in place. So the training for teachers is very paramount, is very important, that they should now be able to understand the children who have been away for very long. They have that fear, they have anxiety, they thought they would never go back to school. So these are some of the psychological issues that teachers have to do. And we have trained several schools, both in Nairobi and outside Nairobi. And we hope we will continue doing this, as it's not a one-time thing. It's a continuous process.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Mohammed Karama, on that comprehensive answer. Inshallah, when we come back, we're going to talk about much more in regards to how realistic is it with the current revised academic calendar, of course, given out by the government, among many other issues that we're going to talk about when we come back after the break. But before then, please let's pay our bills. Wacha tulipe tutafute mshahara.
Horizon TV, the beacon for the nation. On the next episode,
is secularism the new world today?
It is possible for me to live as a Christian in a secular world without compromising, without trying to bring a false kind of reform. I can live a life that is glorifying God, and very many people can desire to follow me because of my example.
Is the Western culture affecting you as Christians, or you may want to debate this?
I would say Christianity in itself is perfect, but the Christian is not perfect.
While we have the Bible and the teachings that are there, but again have mushroomed other prophets that have arisen, also claiming the same Bible and saying, but then you'll find some of their doctrines, the teachings which they propagate, seems to contravene, to contradict the Bible.
Should I come with a view that deviates from that which is revealed in the Bible? The problem is not the Bible, the problem is me.
Horizon TV, the beacon for the nation.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, and thank you so much for keeping it live, Real Talk, right here on Horizon TV. We are talking about the reopening of schools that is set for Monday, the 4th of January, 2021. Now, in the studio, I have Professor Mohammed Karama and Ms. Fatma Ali Suman, who one of them, Professor Mohammed Karama, is the chairperson of the Kenya National Muslims Response Committee on COVID-19, and Ms. Fatma Ali Suman, who is an educationist, an educator here in the studio. Now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much as well for making time for us once again this evening. Talk of schools reopening. When schools were closed, the whole of 2020, big part of 2020 basically, of course it gave birth to a new phenomenon, something that was there, but again it just escalated. Online classes, right? And private schools really maximize on that, while the public schools, the public students did not really actually benefit from that, yeah, apart from a few. So schools are reopening with the academic calendar restructured and changed, and the exams around the corner. Ms. Fatma Ali Saman, I'm going to start with you. Do you think when these students are coming in and preparing for the exams that are set for April, do you think they're coming in from a common level, common ground as they are approaching their exams?
Not really. A lot will depend on how they used the online classes. There are schools that I think did not have access, or rather students who did not have, might not have had access to internet, or maybe even the gadgets that they were going to use for learning. There are students and schools who had very good sophisticated material and platform to do the online and digital learning. So obviously one expected thing is that they will have a lot of variance. But what we have in place that has become a common practice is when they come, we would study their entry behavior and expose them to an assessment. They'll do an assessment so that we know how each one is doing in every aspect of learning. Then also from there on now that informs our plans, and every school and teacher and class would have now, will start planning from there on, particularly on the instructional methods, on the gaps that exist per student, per subject. It's going to be a period of diagonizing the situation. It takes a bit of time, but again, it solves part of the problem, because you're able to know how equipped a learner is, how less equipped the learner is, and where to start from. So based on the entry behavior and the results that you see, you can now set new targets. You look at now how you're going to add value as you progress and learning goes on.
Allow me to dig deeper into this particular topic. When we talk about online classes, Nairobi Muslim Academy was one of the institutions that actually really maximized on that. And I'm sure you took back your students, of course your candidate in grade 4s, and you did the assessment just as you confirmed here. So how effective can you term the online class as well?
In terms of a good number of thematic learning, you'd find the classes, the theoretical bit of conceptualization was done well, particularly with the bright students and those students who are more of visual in nature when it comes to learning. For those who would like to interact with what they are learning, I think they were disadvantaged. Some of the topics, particularly in subjects like science, there was a challenge in terms of practical lessons, and where ordinarily students will conduct the experiments in the laboratory, interact with the chemicals, or if they're studying something, they would interact with that particular item. This was a bit of a disadvantage. However, there was a lot of sharpened skill in terms of using technology. There was a lot of improvement. For us, we took up the G Suite from Google, and many schools followed suit. And you'd find students who ordinarily we did not know their capacity when it came to technology. We were actually amazed. The amount of exposure, the amount of assumption we had about their technological level was so good. And also teachers who were techno-freak had no choice but to improve their skills in the process of doing the job. So you find it was a blessing in disguise, I would say, despite the fact that we were going through a problem, but new skills have been developed. There are new concepts that have been understood now. You'd find a lot of excitement. You even find students now developing a lot of interest. Then one amazing thing that I would say as an educator that I think in the country happened, parents started taking interest in what their kids are learning, because they themselves were at home, and a good number of the parents were participating in the learning process. So you'd find them excited, you'd find them even asking questions after the lesson is over, posting questions, saying, okay, how can we do this? You'd find even parents who are very good in technology coming up to assist the schools on how to do what they were struggling with in a better way. Wow. So there was a big breakthrough. Nobody seems to be talking about this, but I would say there was a bit of blessing in disguise in the process of conducting these classes online. And I think some of the habits we've already picked might be part of the new normal in terms of learning in the country. And we might even end up cutting a lot of cost in terms of, making online classes available to each and every person. And people ventured also into cheaper ways of accessing information, cheaper ways of helping poor kids get access to learning. There was a lot of improvement in terms of the classes that were put on site by the KICD. There were some of the media teams moved in. Although there are those who exploited, there are those who also made use of that to do philanthropic work, and we could see some stations or media houses making available learning for the students. And I'm telling you, there are a lot of good stories to be told during this process as well. Much as there are bad ones, but in terms of learning, it was a bit of transformational, and we've moved as educators, we moved.
Well, thank you. Just the last one before I bring in Professor Mohammed Karama. So for those students who really missed on this online learning and they were not so keen on the platform that were available, talk of the TVs and the radios and the newspapers and the likes, to continue the learning process throughout the pandemic, how much can you say they have missed, if you could quantify just roughly by a percentage, give it a percentage, how much can you say maybe they might have missed ahead of schools reopening?
Giving a percentage would be very tricky because that's not going to be realistic. But again, I would say they've missed quite a bit. And but maybe they could have gained a lot of other social skills. There might, what would happen ordinarily for any good educator when the students are back in school after helping them go through the processes, in what we are calling psychosocial support in schools would involve storytelling, would involve listening to students and what they were exposed to. And we might be surprised there could have been learning, only that maybe the learning wasn't what we have in the curriculum and what we have in the syllabus. Wow. So therefore, as educators, we'll have somewhere to start from, and we are saying not all is lost. And children are very good in readjusting and are more dynamic than adults. So much as we are static ourselves and we might be assuming it will be too difficult for the students, you will be amazed how easily most of them would catch up, unless they have a physical impairment or certain learning disabilities. Children are very good at catching up, and and I think as educators we're also looking at an option of trimming the curriculum and testing students on maybe what is going to be only realistic for the next 2 years, because things cannot happen the way they used to happen in the initial years.
Thank you. Before we touch on matters, the current proposed academic calendar, Professor, still sticking to this aspect of disparity between the privileged and quote-unquote not so privileged in this case, for as far as learning the curriculum is concerned. Just like the mosques reopening, when we had this discussion, it happened in phases. There was some masajid that were able, and they were in a position to, so they could comply easily with the COVID rules and regulations. Similarly, schools have been given strict rules and regulations that they must adhere before they open, and they have to open. And of course, still bringing in the debate of the haves and the haves not, the public and the private. Prof, in terms of this, what do you call it, learning institutions, how do you think public schools could catch up and come up and close some of these available gaps and catching up with the private school? Sorry.
Thank you very much. I think Sister Fatma was a little shy to estimate the disadvantaged. But in a small research that we did in one of the institutions, about 30% of students could not access any of the technologies. They were not able to get internet, they were not able to get the radio programs by institute of the different authorities. It was a challenge for some of these students, and therefore this diversity, the diagnosis will have to observe some of these. We'll have to be able to evaluate and see how best they can capture this situation and be able to address it. That a number of, especially public institutions, that were not able to, people coming from low-income areas, people coming from the rural, where even electricity itself was not available, and there was no continuity in learning. But then they had opportunities to go to some schools and other places to be able to acquire whatever skills. Many of them went into the farms to help the parents and so on. So this is a very key thing to look into in terms of school. As far as face-based opening, which you try to indicate, I think that will not be possible in relation to schools, because a schooling process is a very holistic process. It cannot be done partially, and therefore continuation of the schools, you can't say some schools will stop and others will continue. The only thing is to stagger the programs to fit into the current situation. Also even to stagger the curriculums so that we don't expose children to long hours of schooling as it used to do before. But I think Sister Fatma maybe will be able to allude to that, that possibly we have even to change the timing. Where possible, some kind of facing will come in terms of numbers. Where infrastructure are not available, there will be a split in classes, so that some classes will come for a few hours and others will come for later in the day. This will outstretch the institutions, but that is something that is likely to happen. We are aware also that a number of private schools have closed down. They just went bankrupt immediately after the closure, and they may not be there. So some of this movement and transition will also have to be taken into consideration when we are reopening.
Well, thank you. Prof, just still on you, on matters reopening of schools and learning institutions. You have done, as an entity, as you have done a training for madrasa teachers and ustadhs and managers. So how do madrasa come in for as far as schools reopening is concerned? Because they are also learning institutions, correct?
Yes. This is the unfortunate thing, that in our madrasa, that despite that the madrasa curriculum has now been recognized by the government, our infrastructure in madrasas is something that needs to be addressed. We have different levels of madrasas. We have the duxis, which are very low level, maybe with tahfidh al-Quran and the system there being very different. We have mid-level madrasas where students sit on the floor, crowded with one teacher. Then we have the integrated schools, where at least the infrastructure exists and there is a combination. So our advice to the madrasas is that where the infrastructure does not exist, our response committee, the National Muslim Response Committee, is providing that service to be able to evaluate our madrasas and to be able to advise them whether they should reopen or they shouldn't, using the guidelines that exist from the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, and then our own inputs in terms of religious background. So we feel like our madrasas are a big challenge, and we want to advise that if the basic minimum requirements have not been attained, the madrasas at the lower levels should not be opened, because it will be a high risk for the students.
Oh, okay, thank you. On our last segment, actually, of this particular topic, Ms. Fatma Ali Saman, let's talk about matters, the new curriculum, the new academic calendar that is coming at the middle of the implementation of competence-based curriculum. How realistic is that from an educator's perspective?
I think it's a bit of a complex, because we already had, before the pandemic, we had a situation where we had overhauled our entire curriculum and we were restructuring the education system. And that in itself was going to be a big hassle. And I remember government had set up the education task force, who were to conduct research and see how possibly this could be done, how the institutions would be governed, how what kind of capacities would be required, among the teachers, and what kind of preparedness would schools require to have this become realistic. However, the pandemic came and disrupted the calendar. I think what the government has done, I do not hold brief for the government, is come up with the most realistic way of handling the situation. And what is there right now is we'll have our new academic year beginning in September. When we resume, because we had stopped, we were done with first term, and we had a few weeks to go before we closed schools on the 18th of March. And we are going to resume now in January, and January now by default becomes our second term of the year, and we will be ending the year. Somehow you could also see it as a positive thing, because I think it will also come in synchrony with the budgeting system of the country. It will also be in synchrony with the financial year in terms of budgets.
No.
There'll be something that will come out of it. However, remember we had kids who were going to graduate at a certain time, and the system would be clogged, because again the transition required a bit of planning, so that those finishing standard grade 6 and those who would be finishing, winding up the final standard 8 of the former curriculum were going to go to secondary school at the same time. Then at some point, the same team, the phasing out of the previous old calendar in secondary school, and the previous old system, and the coming in of the new system from junior secondary to senior secondary school would also have clogged the system, and would have had at least every given year about 2 cohorts completing school and wanting to transit. And our problem was, were the institutions that are available going to be enough for the 2 cohorts to join? So now we've created again another complex of other students who had to repeat another extra year. I would sincerely tell you, it's a big, that's actually the biggest challenge and the biggest nightmare. However, I believe maybe we'll cross the bridge when we reach.
So this is possibly to happen for how long, until now you continue integrate normally?
Maybe the next 5 years we'll be working on something and seeing how practical that can be. It will take a lot of patience from every one of us, because again these things were bound to happen whichever way, and we don't plan. I don't think anyone planned for the pandemic, so that's it. We just have to work with what is available and see how the students can move to the next level, and learning continues.
Well, all the best on that, all the best on that. Professor Mohammed Karamo, your parting shot on the topic of discussion tonight.
I believe that for the reopening to be successful, and that we have a safe platform for the students and the teachers and the other workers, the government needs to make a lot of more efforts to ensure that the infrastructure is made available in terms of classrooms to address the social distance. There's need also that sometimes we imagine that people can afford these guidelines like masks. There are families that cannot sustain their students with masks. That needs to be addressed also. The basic minimum requirements for water points where students can wash their hands regularly with soap and sanitizers. These are very crucial items that can ensure the safety of the students and the teachers. And all institutions of learning must be linked to particular health facilities, and they must have some isolation bays in school, where if a child starts showing any symptoms, he can be kept, or he or she can be kept there while the institution, the health facility, is contacted or an ambulance is. In other words, it will not be just calling the parents. It will be important that the school plays a role and links very closely with the health facilities that will be attached to this particular institution, so that quick response is put in place to ensure that, and also the teachers and the management of schools are provided with adequate training to ensure prevention of cases takes place, especially where we have adult teachers and so on, who are more likely to bring in infection from their villages, from their homes, and so on to the children. So mechanisms must be put in place to ensure the safety of the children, and the parents should be assured that going back to school does not contribute to transmission of COVID-19 to their children.
Wow. Thank you. Thanks so much. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much, Professor Muhammad Karama, for that. Ms. Fatma Ali Saman, what would be your parting shot tonight?
Thank you very much. Mine would be a message to both teachers and parents that the children will depend so much on how we behave during this period. If we show any form of helplessness, then we will worsen the situation. And parents and teachers have to talk to students and prepare them. Parents should know that providing of books and uniform and masks and maybe sanitizers will not just be enough, and that the children will need to be talked to, prepared, and be told there's nothing, that they need to have certain skills to protect themselves, and also be open to learn and be prepared to learn, and also their anxieties managed. For teachers also, it's not just about the COVID-19 compliance checklist that we are going to tick the boxes, but rather we are dealing with human beings. We need to ensure that the children feel safe, and we should be genuine when we are doing it. These children are a trust to us from their parents, and we need to make sure that at all times we do not only provide them with the skills, but we also make sure that the environment is safe for them, and the learning processes are conducted in the most meaningful and beneficial manner. And we keep off from any situation that is going to put our children in danger, because they will be now our responsibility. And that if any gaps are seen in terms of the children's problems, in terms of maybe you will find students who have been abused or something, let this be handled in a very professional manner. It shouldn't be a discussion for all, and children should not be harmed further. There would, and it would be very nice if every school had set up a psychosocial support center through the guidance and counseling departments that we already have in the schools. So that would be very helpful. So let's make use of this and do the business the way we do it. I think teachers are good at adjusting.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Fatma Ali Saman. Beg your pardon. And thank you so much, Professor Muhammad Karama, for your time, of course, and your value that you've created, that you've added, not just on me inside the studio, not just on my crew, but again to the entire viewers and the parents who are watching, and the students. Wanafunzi, Monday shule. Monday shule, inshallah. So I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for all of you for keeping us company throughout this hour. Thanks so much to the crew that made this available. Thank you so much for keeping it Horizon TV and Live Real Talk. See you next week, same place, same time. I've been your host, Faisal Kassim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.